guys so much for tuning into our third podcast episode where we're interviewing Miss Clark,
our biology teacher.
Hello, I'm Miss Clark, a biology teacher.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you guys haven't checked out episode 2 yet, do go check that out. That's on hypersonic flights. So they're flights that go at the speed of Mach 10. So if you're interested, do definitely go check that out.
Yes, you can find that episode on our Spotify or on our YouTube channel.
And Miss, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you so much for having me on Stem Cells, the podcast. I'm thrilled to be here. So my name is Miss Clark. I am currently a teacher. Mostly I focus on biology, as it is a joyous, wonderful subject that inspires the youth and brings joy into everyone's lives.
That's nice that you're so passionate about that.
Thank you, yes. I think passion is important,
very important
within an academic subject.
Yes.
But,
yes.
Since you're teaching biology, can we just ask, what inspired you to get into teaching then?
What inspired me to get into teaching? Well, I would like to say my textbook answer now is Mrs. Barnes inspired me to get into teaching. However, the answer that is the actual full 100% truth, because although that is partly the truth, the 100% truth is I was actually at the stage of my life because I was absolutely convinced I was going to be a researcher. That was what I wanted to be from as far back as I can remember. And I was actually at the point where I was carrying out my own research and I was sat on a massive laser microscope every single day, and I would listen to the radio, and I became increasingly concerned at the number of news blasts about teacher shortages in the UK. And so I found out from speaking to a few of my friends or friends' parents who are teachers that science teachers and maths teachers are just almost non-existent. And so I sort of thought to myself, hang on one moment, I've managed to reach the stage that I am happy at, but if a whole generation before me isn't able to actually succeed in even GCSE science and then can't discover their passion at A-level, we're now going to have a massive deficit. And so I thought, right, I would love to be able to help this. What I could see was becoming a problem. And so I spoke to my supervisor and she said to me, Jo, you can do a PhD at any stage of your life. She said, if you want to go into education, do it now whilst you're young, because it's going to be exhausting. And so I said, I will have a go at trying to apply to be a teacher.
That's really nice that you had that selfless thought to put the younger generation before yourself and what you wanted to go into.
I think it's massively important that on the one hand, selfless in that I am thinking of entirely the next generation, but in a way also, I suppose, somewhat selfish, because really we all depend on one another, don't we? We are very much interdependent. Yes.
But I'm really interested to hear more about your research.
Oh, not a problem at all. Yes, absolutely no problem. So I just went for the standard route of A-levels, degree, and then Yes, of course. Yes.
What degree did you do?
Natural sciences.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I went on to do a master's focusing on genetics.
Okay.
And then I was hoping the next step was PhD. I was going to do a PhD. So I was funded by Cancer Research to do my master's because I came up with a proposal based on some research that I'd read, and I wanted to sort of springboard off of that. And so I was working using HeLa cells. Will the listenership be aware of HeLa cells?
It would be nice if you could give your own thoughts and explain that.
Okay, not a problem at all. So HeLa cells, named for Henrietta Lacks, who the original sample of HeLa cells came from. It was from a cancerous growth on Henrietta Lacks. They took a cell sample from her, I believe to identify the cancer that she had. And what was quite wild was like the next day, the cells were actually still alive and they were still proliferating.
Really? Okay.
And this was quite obscene because actually, usually cells have got quite a limited lifespan, like outside of the body. And so this was, these cells are still alive and used in research to this day, which is the exact same cells. Like they've just divided these exact cells. Yeah, absolutely. Wow. And so these cells are quite commonly used for cancer research because they were cancerous cells to begin with.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's really, really good because you can observe these cells in lab conditions and they behave as cancer cells. And so if you can try to sort of essentially see what's happening in these cells and better understand that, and then obviously the ideal is that we can try to sort of fix these cells in lab situations so that we can then try to work out, number one, what are the actual mechanisms behind cancer specifically? And then number two, how do we fix this?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's really cool how those cells have sort of preserved themselves.
Oh, it's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. And actually a massive controversial debate because the Lax family have received next to no finance for cells that have actually, most of the understanding that we have got now about how to treat cancer is based on research that's happened off those. So you've got like Big Pharma have made millions off of this, and yet her family have made none. So it's an interesting ethical dilemma there.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
But it's quite interesting to see that your work has had such a big impact on the medical field today.
Yes, what was quite interesting is I'd just finished working on a paper the year that I decided to finish, and that one, we had managed to find a pattern whereby the nucleus dropped in the cell during the cell cycle, and it then started to go through mitosis very, very awkwardly. But what was quite cool is I thought to myself, well, what if it's dropping because the microtubules aren't holding it in place? And so I thought, well, maybe if we could actually accelerate their growth, could we hold it in place? And we found that absolutely did work. And so then we looked at, so it was a particular protein depletion that if we got rid of this protein, it could be held in place. And so we looked at essentially drugs that would cause the same protein depletion so that we could use this in humans. And I left it at the stage where we would just, because you understand there's the clinical trial stages, we had just finished cell dish and we were moving into chicken embryo. So they fertilized the chicken egg and then on the embryo so that you've got a slightly larger organism. And so far we're moving up the stages, so hopefully definitely within our lifetime, so long as we make it through clinical trials on humans, this should actually be a potential treatment that will only target cancerous cells, which is the real promise.
Because that's one of the big issues with chemotherapy, isn't
Absolutely,
it?
Chemo and radio, you've got to worry about just how unwell you make a person that is already unwell. And actually, if we can use treatments that only target the cells that are causing problems,
that'd be great.
It'd be amazing.
I think kind of stemming off of that, just recently, not sure how recent by the time this is uploaded, but we just uploaded a video on nanomedicine and how nanoparticles are being used in cancer treatment. So
this seems hopefully to be the way forward, which I think should be positive.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yes.
But anyhow, how are your roles kind of based as a researcher? What did you do on a day-to-day basis then?
Well, I cannot glamorise the role in any way. I did used to think that essentially, you know that saying about if you have the monkeys typing for the unlimited period of time, they would actually eventually come up with all of the works of Shakespeare. I did feel a bit like a monkey hitting a keyboard from time to time. So like my day would be, I would wake up early. I've always been an early bird rather than a night owl. I would wake up early. I would go over to the lab. I would check on my cells because I'd just grow cells in dishes every single day, feed the cells, and then I would get myself into the microscope and carry out some time lapses. So they would usually be set up for anything between sort of 2 or 8 hours.
Okay.
So sometimes I'd do an overnight run, and that would then, I'd set that up before I'd head off to bed. And then once you've then got these videos back, they are on the computer, and you literally just time lapse through these images, and you look at what's happening. And then I'd write down observations about what was happening. I would have to run blots to prove that my cells they were depleted of certain proteins, because essentially if they weren't, then I don't even know what I'm looking at. And then my time would be split between essentially carrying out the lab work, analysing the lab work, and then working on getting papers published. Because if you don't publish papers, it's much, much harder for your lab to get funding. And without funding, you can't do anything.
Yeah, that's obviously quite important then, isn't it?
Massively, absolutely. My supervisor was fantastic at sort of like spurring us on and saying where there was a potential for a paper to be squeezed out. And so we, as a lab, I think in that year, I had 4 papers released. And some of them were just like reviews of prior work in the area that we were basing ours on, and then others were of our actual findings, which was quite cool.
I see.
So you were in research and I've gone to teaching. What was the process like from switching from researcher to being a teacher?
Difficult, yes. It was a difficult one for me. I have always struggled somewhat with my social skills, and so I did panic that actually being in front of a classroom would be a problem, because I imagined that you would need some social skills, whereas actually sat on my own with a dish of cells in front of a microscope, that seemed more my comfort zone.
It is quite a drastic change going from being on your own in the lab to then always being around people.
Because you're essentially presenting every
this is it.
Lesson.
However, I also think that although a challenge for me at the time, I think it's one of my greatest areas of personal growth.
Yes.
And I think actually,
nice.
I think we should be defined more by our ability to overcome challenges. And whereas I could have sat in front of that microscope and been quite happy, I think I am now profoundly happy because I know that I have overcome a challenge that I had. And I think that's
quite a good
great.
outlook to have.
Yes, absolutely. And so now I get quite excited about coming in and talking about science to a group of students. And if I can get them excited about science, that is the ultimate joy.
And I also think that it's quite nice that you have that background in research to kind of help apply that for the students to understand.
Yes, I hope so.
I've had you for 2 years now, because I've been year 11 as well. And you've I think there were times where you've linked your research into what you're teaching us, because you've talked to us about the process of researching, and then you write a paper and then you send it off to another lab.
Absolutely, yes.
As well, I think that's sort of really nice to sort of expand our knowledge out of the syllabus.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I do hope so, because I think it's quite important, especially at A-level, if you are thinking of pursuing science. I think it's really important that you don't necessarily have like the glamorized view that is sometimes shared on, like you might watch a documentary or a film or something and you think, oh, that's the life for me, that's so fantastic. And it is an absolutely wonderful life, but I think you do need to be aware that it is... I just think people need to be aware of the realities of lab life. And if I can provide that whilst teaching, more the better, really.
Definitely. So can we just trace back a bit, and do you want to just tell us a bit about your A-levels and your sixth form life?
Not a problem at all. So for my A-levels, I chose to study biology. Yes, I had always enjoyed biology, and I thought I would like to further my understanding there as much as possible. And I did chemistry. I did chemistry because I was wildly in love with GCSE chemistry.
Yeah. I also think it ties quite nicely into biology.
There's a lot of overlap.
There is a lot of overlap. And I think actually at the beginning of the biology course, there is so much biochemistry that actually, right?
Yeah, the water molecules, I remember.
Water, absolutely. Like the understanding of water lends itself perfectly to both. And then just understanding the understanding from chemistry just actually heightened my understanding of biology.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they're a really good combo.
I think they're a solid combo, aren't
Yeah.
they? Yeah, and I think it just kept me aware of how almost there are some instances where I think we ought not to be separating them. I think really it depends how close a lens you want to zoom in on them. I think for biology we sometimes have a slightly more macro lens, and then we zoom in further, and then that is chemistry essentially.
Yeah.
And then zoom in even further and we've got ourselves some physics, haven't we?
Yeah.
I've always thought that seems to be the relationship. And I think that I was more interested really in the chemistry aspect and how it links itself to the macro. Potentially it might be because I'm a slightly lazier thinker that I wasn't then willing to think of the step before that. I was quite happy to just let that be.
Yeah.
So how did your A-level choices then go on to influence your degree choice, or did that not?
So I think I always knew that I wanted to go on to study something that was science-based.
Yeah.
And I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to go down the biology or the chemistry route. After sort of year 13 chemistry made me feel like I did want to lean more heavily on biology.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, I always knew that I wanted to go down a science route ultimately.
Yeah.
So obviously you took, what were your other 1 or 2 A-levels that you took?
I also took psychology.
Yes.
I thought it was interesting. It was one of those subjects that we didn't get to do before A-level, and I thought it would be quite interesting. I thought it would be quite a scientifically rigorous course, and so there would be the links there, which was good. And then I also did religious studies,
Yes.
which was fascinating. We got to learn a lot of ethics, and it was an exciting course.
I think ethics does play quite a big role, especially in biology, like you mentioned.
Well, especially if you go down the medicine route as
Oh,
well.
absolutely, yeah. I think absolutely. If you're going into any sort of caring industry, I think it is important that we understand how to make ethical decisions. I think ultimately working in any lab, you do need to sometimes stop and ask yourself, am I making the right ethical choice here?
Yeah.
I think sometimes we ought not to make progress just for progress's sake. We ought to actually think of some of the wider applications, and ethics gives us a foundation for that.
Yeah. So can we ask what degree you studied and why you wanted to go down that path?
Yes, not a problem. So I went down the path of the natural sciences just because I thought it was a very, very broad. The sciences offered to you there are very, very broad.
Yeah.
And although usually you choose either sort of the biology, chemistry side or the physicsy, mathsy side, you can choose your modules throughout the entire course.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, and so it's really open, far more open than if you were to solely choose to study biology, chemistry or physics. And I know there are other courses like biochemistry that exist that is absolutely fantastic. I think ultimately I just really wanted the flexibility because although I thought I wanted to be a researcher, I worried about, is it called shoeboxing?
Oh, putting yourself in a box.
Yeah, I worried about putting myself into a box too early. I worried that I could close doors for myself by making one silly mistake on a UCAS form.
Yeah.
I think ultimately I was narrow-minded and foolish to think that, because I think really, had I done any degree, you can turn it around to your strength.
I mean, you have as well, because you started in research and have gone to teaching.
Absolutely. So
2 different ends of the
yeah,
spectrum.
it was one of those things that as an 18-year-old, I was so convinced that I was making the right choice, because otherwise I was going to end up in a situation where, I don't want a career in this field, but I've got no option. But no, that was very narrow-minded. So I think if you do know specifically an interest of yours, there's no reason to keep it ridiculously broad.
Yeah.
What sort of stuff did you study in your natural sciences degree?
So we did actually do quite a lot of biochemistry.
Okay.
That's good, because I think you mentioned that you found that area quite interesting.
Absolutely, yeah. So I would like actively choose to do lots of biochemistry. It's quite a lot of crossovers actually with the A-level course.
Oh, okay.
Really.
Yeah. So you start off by looking sort of like at the ultrastructure of the cell.
Oh, okay.
And so you get to look at that, but you introduce some more chemistry. But actually, yeah, I remember the first sort of year or so was really sort of a recap of A-level.
Okay.
Yeah, most of it I did think this is actually quite similar content. Yeah. Then towards the end, towards your final year, you can actually choose to do a research project.
Okay.
And so that was when I really was absolutely convinced I want to go into research.
Yeah.
Like, this
Yeah.
is so exciting to get up every day
Yeah.
and feel like you're making a difference globally.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes,
it's wild.
definitely.
Yeah.
And also what you said about the first year being mostly just a recap of A-level.
Yeah.
But I also think in some aspects that could be good just because it's such a big transition from
Yeah.
school to university.
Absolutely, because essentially if you think about the A-level course that we've got now, where you'll have X number of lessons per week where you're with your teachers,
Yeah.
whereas at university I would have usually it would be usually like the mornings were used for lectures, so you would have like maybe 2 hours of lectures
Yeah.
in the morning, and then you would go off and independently work.
Yeah.
Followed by sometimes you'd have practical sessions in the afternoons, and then you would have tutorials in the evenings. So actually there was so much more independent learning going on. And also I think it's important to remember that even if you have done well in your A-levels, have you necessarily 100% understood that content inside and out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think this got me to be a lot more familiar with the science, not necessarily in a way where, oh, I need to use this word to gain a mark. It was
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
I need to understand this inside out.
Yeah.
More so getting understanding than learning for an exam.
I think so, yeah. Your sort of intention was significantly different.
But just to kind of round things off, for any younger students that are kind of in year 12, year 13, kind of confused on where to go
Yes.
in science, do you have any advice for them?
Yes. Well, I say yes very quickly, but I'm just formulating because I believe I will have some advice, which is that I think what you need to do actually is to think about what is it, if you're specifically within the sciences, what is it about the sciences that interests you the most? Because ultimately you need to make sure that you are choosing a degree that is genuinely interesting to you. Otherwise, when you need to wake up and be in a lecture theatre for 8 a.m.
Yeah.
and you have been out the evening before and you are feeling very sleepy, if you do
Yeah.
not enjoy your subject, you're not making it to those lectures.
Yeah.
Okay.
I also think there's so many people that choose a degree purely to get to the end goal of
Absolutely,
the job. But
yeah.
if you don't enjoy your time studying that degree, then there's
Absolutely.
no point.
Probably 3 miserable years.
It will be
Yeah.
3 miserable years followed by your subsequent career life, which is
Yeah.
really, truly sad. I think a lot of career-based decisions nowadays are done based on a quick search of earning potentials,
Yeah.
which
Yes.
also makes me very, very sad.
But I think if you enjoy your job, then there's always potential to excel in that.
Absolutely.
And get more money.
Absolutely. So if you are, essentially, if you are interested in any area, so long as you might need to make some, like, for example, the ones that pay the most money, you also do need to bear in mind that generally they pay that much for a reason in terms of maybe how much, like your
How much you're putting into the job.
Like your skill
absolutely
set and the
your
caliber that you
skill
need.
set needs to go into it. How much time do you need to sacrifice at
Yeah.
home?
Yes.
Like, is that an important aspect to you?
Yeah.
Because I come from a background where my mother was a doctor, and she would be at work from sort of like 8 a.m. till 8 at night every single day.
wow.
And then she'd be doing an hour's commute either side. So
Yeah.
although a lot of people do think like this is the area where you get a lot of money, you do also need to bear in mind, are you going to be happy and content with the sacrifices that
Yeah,
come
it's not
alongside
just-
that.
It's not just all positives.
No,
There's-
absolutely not. And I think quite often we think about like, oh, it would be great to have a job where you drive a expensive car or you have the massive house.
Yeah.
But then you also do need to think to yourself, but actually, how much time am I in that expensive car showing
That's
off?
true.
And how
Yeah.
much time am I in that lovely house? And really, I think if you are enjoying what you're doing, then you gain your happiness from that
Yeah.
And I
as
guess
well.
the money sort of takes a backseat as well.
To my mind, yes.
Yeah.
To my mind, actually, you are able to live within your means. You work out how to live within your means.
Yeah.
And yeah, it might mean that I will not be living in a mansion in my lifetime. But then again, my life goal has never been to do that.
Yeah.
And so I'm really very content with what I do. And I think at the end of the day, you cannot say that inspiring the next generation is not worth giving up that hope for driving around in insert name of expensive car.
Yeah. And I think mansion or no mansion, I mean, you've had such a big impact, like locally at your school and also globally through your research. So I don't think
Thank you.
Yes, definitely, because having as a teacher it sort of opened my eyes to research, because I kind of
Brilliant.
disregarded it as
Right.
a sort of career option.
I think it's one of
But-
those ones that where we, if you aren't made aware of what's actually involved, why would you know?
Yeah, because obviously we don't really meet researchers
No.
on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely not. And so I think it's one of those things where, like, you're in a position where everybody has a doctor that they've been to in their
Yeah,
life.
yeah.
And so that's kind of like what we associate, the sort of, you are very scientifically minded and that's a job.
Because you always just hear like lawyer, doctor,
Yeah,
engineer.
lawyer,
but
doctor, engineer absolutely is another.
researchers never really
Yeah.
Yeah.
sort of the top 3 sort of careers that people look
Absolutely.
towards.
I think we need to have a much, much broader scope of what being a scientist actually is.
Yeah.
Yes,
And then
definitely.
if you can find an area within there that makes you happy, then everything is wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for,
Thank you
so much you
for
so
inspiring
much.
us with your journey.
Thank you. I am overjoyed to be on Stem Cells,
Thank you so
the
much.
podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to like and leave us a rating on Spotify.
And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
yeah. And
Yes,
we'll see you
subscribe
guys-
down here.
Yeah.
Yes.